Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, and actually good evening to some of you. Happy New Year for some of you that we have not seen, but welcome to this webinar, virtual webinar of Global Forum Remittances Investment and Development. I am Pedro Vasconcelos. I'm the manager of the financing facility for remittances here at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And today, I will just make some remarks and introducing the panel before we start. I would like to welcome you, of course, to this first session of the track 2 of the eGFRID dialogue, private sector and digitization. I would like, with respect to this, to introduce the moderator of today, Leon Isaac, that will then introduce also the participants of this panel. Leon is the founder and chief executive officer of DMA Global, a specialized international development company that he founded in 2007. He's a seasoned expert and business leader in the payments and international development fields with a particular expertise in migrant remittances. And he has over 30 years hands-on experience on this. He's an economist by training and is currently based in France. He will be moderating this session that will be the first of several that will come in the months to come. We expect to do one on this particular track of private sector every month, and all this leading to the upcoming GFRID summit that will happen in June later this year. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Leon, and just to remind that this session will be recorded. It will be available online as well. You will be able to ask your questions in the chat. We will transmit this to the moderator for the session of Q&A that will be held right after the discussions and the presentations from the several participants. So without further ado, Leon, I'll give you the floor.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Pedro. Good afternoon to everyone from my time zone. Good evening to those of you in Asia, and good morning to those of you in the Western Hemispheres. And I'll echo Pedro's wishes for a very happy, particularly healthy, and let's say a freer year this year than we had last year. So as Pedro mentioned, we are going to be talking today very much on the private sector and looking at how last year was from a remittances section for them, some of the lessons that were learned and the changes that were made. We'll be then moving on to look at some specific examples and then move from that finally to recommendations on how to move forward as we go into this year and beyond, not just for the private sector, but how the private sector can work with all the other players and particularly the public sector in this marketplace. It's been a challenging time, I think, for all, but we've had a lot of smiling faces and actually a lot of positive stories come out. So hopefully we can cover many of those today. You'll have noticed that the format we're in is a webinar format. That doesn't mean that we want this to be a one-way communication process. We're very much looking for input and feedback from each of you. And after we finish the first round of questions, we'll be throwing open a Q&A function on your screen for you to be able to send questions in. And we will try and answer or address as many of those as we can. And those that we can't, we will make sure that we provide some sort of comment after the session when we get back to everyone. So I think just before we start with our fantastic panel that we have here, just sort of say the first part, we're going to take a look back and describe what actually happened, what has been seen, what are some of the trends that we've seen that are going to be with us as we move forward. I think if we look at last year, if we take ourselves back 12 months to what we were doing on the 12th of January 2020, I'm sure we wouldn't have mapped out all the things that we ended up doing for the year in the plans that we were making and putting into place, which I guess it makes life exciting, doesn't it? But I think when you look at the whole COVID situation and the impacts on remittances, there were some pretty quick recognitions that there were some major things happening that would need to be addressed. I think one of the biggest areas that there was challenges with was the headline figures on what was going to happen with transactions. And I'd be very keen for our participants to maybe address that. But just to sort of summarize that, many of you are aware that in April, the World Bank, to their credit, brought out a forecast of what they expected to be happening. And at that time, we were completely in the middle of the major lockdowns in most of the world. And so the projections were for a fall of around 20% across the globe, and then probably pretty flat or a slight recovery for 2021. Interestingly, by the time the next forecast was made, which was the end of October, the fall for 2020 had reduced to around 7%, so a lower fall than projected, but then a further fall this year as some of the emergency measures and that were put in place wore out and recoveries were not seen or are not seen as quickly as anticipated. What's been interesting, I think, for me, as much as anything, is the amount of discussion that there has been about what's happening with remittances, much more than before. And countries like Mexico, Pakistan, Philippines, and others, where there have been pretty significant increases in big markets. So clearly, we always know forecasting is a difficult area, but last year it's particularly difficult. So we're keen to get some insights on what people have seen and maybe regional differences in transaction trends. The money transfer operators, all of the private sector operators were at the forefront of what was happening, and everybody had to make changes one way or another. And personally, I was impressed by how quickly many people were able to do it, make some very bold and brave decisions. Nearly always, I'd say everyone, with the customer, trying to keep the money flowing and the customers happy throughout the process, which was great. I think we're going to spend some time, I'm sure, talking about digitization, which has been one of the key areas, and also some time today talking about how remittances can be leveraged going forward. But I think one of the things with digital we still need to remember is that cash is still king in this space. Despite all the pickup around the world in digital and the refocusing of many of the traditional companies on that and the advance of some of the newer entrants, if you look at all the evidence around how money is sent, there's still more money sent using cash than there are other methods. So that will be something for us to think about in the future. So I'm going to stop there and pass on to our panel. Just to say, we've got four fantastic panelists here. We've got Veronica Stutzgart, who I think probably known to all of you as the founder and CEO of the International Association of Money Transfer Networks. We have Nika Nagavi, who I think is also probably known to many of you, especially those of you in the digital and mobile area. Nika has worked at the GSMA for a number of years. She's now moved, I'm delighted to say we haven't lost her to the industry, and she's moved to MFS Africa, who I think many of you are familiar with as well, and will be playing a key role there. So she's joining us. I'm delighted to say we've got Prasanna Rao, who's the Chief Business Officer of Merchant Trade. And I think, you know, the real driver behind some of the great practical digital initiatives, particularly with value and transfers from Malaysia to Bangladesh and Pakistan, but many other areas as well. And then last but by no means least, we have Michaeli Grosso, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Democrants, which is a slightly different angle, basically looking to leverage remittances to help build insurance products in the insurance market for those who most need it, and has also got some very strong practical experience. So we've got a broad range of people, and I'm delighted that we will be starting with Veronica, who, as I said, is the founder and CEO of IAMTIN. She's been involved in this industry for more years than she probably would care to remind us. But right back at the beginning, when IAMTIN was really just a concept, and I think all I can say is I really admire your energy, Veronica, because I think we've seen more of you since the crisis started than we did before, and we saw a lot of you then anyway. So I know you've been all over this area. So why don't I stop there and ask you to share some thoughts with us, and then we'll move down the line.
Thank you, Leon. Thank you for a very kind introduction. Hello to everyone. My name is, as Leon mentioned, Veronica Stusco. I want to share with you the view of the private sector. As Leon mentioned, before the pandemic, the world was completely different. The remittance industry was different, was still growing. And the industry was undergoing a gradual shift away from customers using cash to using digital channels. However, when the pandemic hit in full and the lockdowns were enforced in many countries, the remittance industry was significantly affected, like Leon mentioned before, and that was when everything changed. So the migrants started losing their jobs, they lost the ability to send money, and that was when the whole remittance industry was impacted. So for that reason, we decided in March to join forces with UNCDF, and in collaboration with them, we launched a survey, an industry survey, in order to assess the impact of COVID-19 on migrants and remittances. So in this survey, we decided to cover over 30 countries, serving over 20 million of migrants. We surveyed remittance service providers, banks, payments aggregators, and card networks. From the payments aggregators, we considered there what we call the hybrid or omni-channel, so those that were serving already the traditional and the digital. So over 63% were omni-channels, and the rest were serving either one or the other. But we have to consider that there was already a shift on digital. It was not as accelerated as we saw after with COVID, but there was already a shift that has been going on. From the survey, we also ask all these the participants how were they affected by the pandemic. 91% of them responded that their business had been affected. From that 91, 69 mentioned that they had a decrease in transactions, in volume of transactions, while 31 had an increase on volume of transactions. We have to think that the survey was made in March, when it was a lot of uncertainty. So when we asked them how was the business itself affected, they had declining in remittance volume, they have closed locations, they had staff isolation, they have liquidity issues, and bank de-risking. So basically, it was a perfect storm. We asked them also how long would they survive if this crisis continue for longer than 6 months. Around half of them said that it was very difficult for them to survive. So it was clear that we needed to implement crucial changes into the situation. So that was when the remittance service provider, as Leon mentioned it before, he says how quickly they reacted. It was clear when we saw the survey that yes, something needed to change quickly. But we also noticed during the survey that not all the countries have been affected in the same way. So for example, we noticed that South Asia, East Asia, and Pacific region have been mostly affected by outbound remittance changes, while nations in Sub-Saharan Africa have been impacted by the drop in inbound remittances. So in order to continue and to understand more about the impact that we were seeing on the industry, we decided to have one-to-one meetings with various remittance service providers. And from those meetings, it was clear that there was a shift to digital and mobile channels, which it was not surprising by that time because we had the lockdown in place in many countries. And in many countries, in a few countries, we had remittances that were not considered essential services. So the location had to close. So that also helped to move to digital. Another important aspect that we had from this one-to-one meeting when we were trying to quantify, that is very difficult to quantify, was we found out that there was a shift from informal channel to formal channel. So this is something that we continue talking about it through our monthly webinars with the CEO of different remittance service providers. So that was important, but overall, it was very clear that COVID-19 acted as a catalyst for digitalization, and scaling up to digital or mobile channel was definitely a priority. So I will stop here, and I think we can continue with initiatives later on.
Great, thanks very much, Veronica. I mean, I think that's fascinating, particularly this piece that we continue to talk about, the informal versus the formal side. I'm sure we'll come back and talk about that, particularly as we go forward, as to whether we think that's going to continue as a movement opens up again. Great, now I'm going to come to Nika Nagavi. So Nika, I believe you're probably in London. I didn't actually check that at the moment, so I hope you're staying safe anyway. And I know that you're wearing a new hat today with MFS Africa. So perhaps you can say a little bit about that, but just to say that for a number of years, Nika has really been pushing forward and particularly trying to get real insights and analysis that will help the digital space, particularly the mobile money operators, to grow their business or to participate in this area. So Nika, you're very welcome, and I'll hand over to you to maybe pick up the baton that Veronica passed, particularly on the digital side of things.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm going to be mostly talking about my previous role and what we saw in terms of digitization via mobile money. We all know that we started 2020 with the mobile money industry reaching a major milestone of 1 billion accounts, which was a tremendous achievement for an industry that is just over a decade old. And less than a couple of months into the decade, as we were celebrating, the whole world was put on a pause by this unprecedented pandemic. We all know that the magnitude of the impact of this crisis is more pronounced in emerging markets. The World Bank estimates as many as 150 million people may fall back into extreme poverty by the end of 2021, mainly in Africa and South Asia. Also, we heard Leon talking about the World Bank projections with regards to international remittances. The steepest decline in recent history, projecting a drop of up to 14% by 2021. So what did this really mean for the mobile money industry and the international remittances, basically via mobile money? So what we saw was that in most markets, mobile money providers became an integral part of this kind of COVID-19 response and recovery measures, and a critical infrastructure for governments and regulators. We saw governments and a number of mobile money providers and their regulators coming up with different measures in the early days, including increasing transaction and balance limits, transaction fee waivers, flexible KYC and onboarding requirements, also declaration of mobile money service providers and agents and as essential providers, and liquidity support to agents. The main reason that they chose, obviously, the mobile money providers compared to other channels and fintech players and, let's say, app-based platforms, was that in less developed markets, mobile money is far more accessible than other alternatives. Based on our previous State of the Industry report, we saw that mobile money services are available in most markets where people don't have access to financial services, and a large proportion of population is unbanked. There are 290 live mobile money services across 95 countries, 7.7 million agents globally, with 3.4 million of them being in Africa, responsible for digitizing cash and de-digitizing funds. So these assets were very valuable, and that's why governments and regulators really chose mobile money as part of this response coverage to COVID. So moving away from that macro kind of picture, when it came to remittances via mobile money, it was more critical than ever, as Veronica mentioned as well, to find solutions which were accessible, affordable, and digital when the lockdown and different social distancing measures happened. So despite the World Bank projections, we saw that mobile money enabled remittances had a healthy growth and remained resilient compared to other channels. We published this in 2019, that 7.3 billion mobile money enabled international remittances were processed via all mobile money platforms globally. I'm not allowed to share the 2020 figures yet. They're under embargo until the release of GSMA's State of the Industry report in March, but the numbers are quite positive, and that's all I can share stat-wise at the moment. But this healthy growth in mobile money enabled international remittances is mainly because mobile money is more and more proving itself as a means to extend the reach, the convenience and security of international remittances, while also increasing their affordability by reducing their costs. So we did a study a few years back with DMA. We've done this study actually 3 times, and every time it showed that mobile money enabled international remittances were much cheaper than all their other alternatives. The other reason behind this growth is that this crisis drove a cultural kind of reset towards adapting digital tools in every aspect of life. So, and I know that we've been in this industry and in remittances, we've been talking about stickiness of cash in the send corridors for so many years. And for the first time, we saw a shift in consumer behavior toward digital payments, mainly because of the perception of cash as a vehicle for coronavirus, but also because of the limits on movements during the peak of the pandemic. I want to emphasize one thing, that the competition is in formal channels. So for the reasons that we're all fully aware of. So we're not saying that mobile money is competing with other traditional channels. And when we talk about this growth in international remittances by mobile money, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are taking away market share from traditional players. It really literally means that the size of the pie is growing. And we're taking shares away from basically informal and Hawala-based systems. So the stats are quite old, the ones that I'm going to mention. For instance, one of the more prosperous corridors in mobile money enabled international remittances in Africa is between Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina. And I remember in 2017, what Orange was doing in that corridor alone was $387 million, which exceeded the estimated basically forecast, the forecast from the World Bank in the same corridor. Just to wrap up, and I'm conscious that I've taken a bit of time, some of the benefits of digitizing remittances via mobile money is, we've highlighted them, in a recent case study on value merchant trade, which was a learning partnership between the GSMA and IFAD. And it was published last week. So by all means, have a look at that study. I'm sure Prasanna will cover most of the story in his bit, and I'm not going to spoil his basically contributions. I highly recommend the case study if you're keen to replicate the success story in a different market. It also offers like some insights on mobile money providers who are thinking about using international remittances as an anchor kind of solution in Asia or other regions. Because what we know is that mobile money really started as a domestic remittance kind of and P2P vehicle in Africa. And that's the vanilla kind of mobile money model. And this case study shows that there are other like entry points for providers that are in different market contexts. Also, there are two things that we cover in this case study that is less talked about and written about. One is around linking remittances to adjacent financial services, such as credit, savings, and insurance, and the lessons that were learned along the way. And the second one is on efficiency gains as the result of integrating a blockchain solution in the backend. It also covers some of the things that Veronica kind of mentioned on formalizing informal remittances that I mentioned as well, reducing costs and so on. So I highly recommend it. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Leon again.
Great, thanks, Nika. I think you covered a lot of ground there, and actually you've served up a perfect introduction for Prasanna there. So I think she's fed yourself open goal to that one, Prasanna. But so I'm delighted to say that we're going to come to Prasanna Rao now, who's the Chief Business Officer for Merchant Trade. In fact, Prasanna's background was originally in telecoms and particularly startups. I think it's actually great to see the movement into this remittance area, whether it was by your design or not, I don't know, Prasanna, but you're here now and you've got a great story to tell. But I think what's also really interesting is, and clearly comes out from the case study, which actually I did just read this morning, to be honest. So do a quick, oh, you probably can't read that very well, but anyway, it's a great publication, and I assume it will be circulated either during or after this session. I would encourage everybody to look at it. It really tells a great story and presents some really useful data and facts around it. But I think what I think comes through as well from your background, Prasanna, is this sort of can-do attitude. The barriers that we've probably, some of us feel like we've lived in for years, don't seem to exist in your world. So I'm very keen to get your perspective on what happened to you last year in particular, and what the basis for your success is. And then we'll come on later to talk about the way forward. But over to you now.
Thanks, Leon, and thanks, Nika, for setting up the stage for me as well. I mean, at the time of the crisis, there was no much economic activity at both send side as well as the receive side. Malaysia typically is a send side market, predominantly sending side. South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the subcontinent, Indian subcontinent workers who are here. All of them under a lockdown, both sides. There's no major economic activities happening at both the sides. Even if the send side was open for that matter, the receiving side was closed, which meant that the volumes were under pressure for us. Definitely the things looked really bad as to how are we going to manage this, if this whole situation is going to continue beyond 3 months, 6 months. All kind of numbers were being worked out, and then how do we do that? As far as the overall macro things are concerned, I mean, the health issues, handing cash notes, which, as Nika said, is considered as the biggest carrier of the COVID-19 more than anything else, and direct customer contacts at the agent outlet without a protective gear posed a massive kind of a health risk for the staff. So which meant that the mobile transfer operators were themselves kind of cautious about it and then trying to close in the conventional channels. Liquidity challenges due to cash flow disruptions and volatile exchange rates. The exchange rates were very volatile because of the kind of market conditions that we were in, which also caused kind of an hindrance in rebalancing of the cash in the digital accounts. Which again, there was a pressure, extreme pressure on the over escalating operational costs due to the shrinking of volumes. Forced closures and remote working definitely posed huge challenges to the service providers, not only in terms of they being break even, in terms of just simply the ability to continue operating. Apart from this, the operators also faced challenges in transitioning customers, shifting customer behavior. I mean, as Nika rightly said, that they are so used to the stickiness of cash, and the stickiness of convenience of cash was so much there to digital channels, due to lack of digital readiness in the market and face-to-face customer verification obligations from the regulation. All these things were actually not making things easy for us in terms of how do we actually take forward at this unprecedented storm that hit us during March 2020. And also to just kind of mention here that there is always an inertia, even from the operators, to transform to digital, is because not knowing the kind of success what they're going to actually experience, and then there is a kind of effort that is required to kind of go and educate the customers, kind of create awareness to the customers. This kind of become a tipping point for many of the operators to now kind of move digital. Few of them were kind of waiting at the brink to kind of go digital. They were kind of pushed immediately, and those who were half digital, kind of omni-channel, were now completely focusing on digital. That's what happened to Value as well. I mean, during those pandemic time, where 40% of our digital contribution jumped up to 70% of digital contributions. And the most interesting factor is that even after all the, I wouldn't say we are out of this completely, but then when the kind of serious impact was kind of relieved, we saw that the customers kind of continued to use this digital channels. So at that point in time, we were very clear the solution for this is Tech-celeration. Okay, we need to kind of accelerate the whole digital journey. The Tech-celeration was definitely the solution. Higher rates of digital financial inclusion can definitely mitigate this, and keep flows in the formal channel, as Nika mentioned about it, and then even Nika mentioned about it. The only way not to give this in a golden platter to informal channel was make sure that we accelerate the technical or the digital adoption among the customers. Otherwise, which definitely could potentially move to informal. So we took up this challenge. We used a lot of the social media, where all these workers were busy or probably engaged with the digital media that they were always involved with. So we kind of made the most of it to kind of engage them through social media. I'll talk about it a bit later in terms of what happened, but this is generally in terms of what was the crisis, what it hit us, and then how we kind of actually try to take up this challenge during these challenging times.
Great, thank you, Prasanna. I think you've done very well in setting out a whole list of challenges there. So we're looking forward to how you solve those. It's a bit like one of those Christmas fairy stories. You told us all the bad things, so we'll look forward to the good things later on. So thanks so much for that. Now going to move to our final panelist, last but not least for sure. So, and this is Michaeli Grosso, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Democrants. This is a slightly different angle to what we've talked about here, because as I mentioned earlier, this is basically looking to combine remittances with insurance solutions for those lower down the pyramid. And so I think it's great actually that we're looking at this, because for those of us who've lived through probably the best part of the last 2 decades in the remittances space, so much of the discussion initially was around the cost of remittances, although the actual need for people to send money has always been recognized as great for development. A lot of the focus and measurement has been around the cost, and it will continue to be, as we know, because it's in the SDGs. For those of you who haven't seen the latest RPW data, at the end of last year, the overall global price was 6.51%, which was actually down from 6.74% or 75% in the previous quarter, and is the lowest price ever recorded. So still some way to go, but getting closer. I think what's more important is there's now a much broader recognition around the need to not just transfer money, but it's actually the use of those money. It's a gateway to financial inclusion. It's a whole much broader picture than purely how much it costs to send from A to B. And I guess, Michaeli, you've been working in this space for some time now, so we'd love to know your perspective and your challenges. So over to you.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, Leon, for this introduction. Democrans is an insurance technology player for emerging markets. What we do is we help insurance companies access new customer segments and increase their digital sales. Our mission is to make insurance accessible and affordable to those who need it most. We are headquartered in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and from there we're present in 12 countries across Middle East and Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. My objective with the session of today is to give you an example of a project that we have implemented in the past few years to link remittances with other financial services for migrant work. In particular, in insurance, that during COVID-19 proved to be an unmet need for migrants worldwide. In 2017, we applied for a grant to the financing facility for remittances of eGFRID, together with ADA, an NGO from Luxembourg dedicated to poverty reduction through microfinance. The grant, which was provided by eGFRID and other donors, had the objective to provide insurance via a digital solution to migrant workers in the UAE and their families back home. For any of you who are not aware, the UAE is a country with 90% expat population, of which 2/3 are low-income workers. Most of them, they would come from the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia. They're very young, 25 to 40 years old, and they migrate to the UAE to sustain their families back home. Running market research, we have understood that these people do not have enough insurance, apart from some mandatory cover for health and repatriation from both their host and home countries. And they're extremely worried about losing their job or having an accident, as either of these two would prevent them to send money back home, right? So after running this initial market research, we have started to build a partnership, and this has proven to be one of the hardest part of this project. It's very hard to align the interest of different parties. On one hand, the insurance company, and on the other hand, the distribution partner. In terms of insurer, we worked with AXA, which has a dedicated business unit called AXA Emerging Customers, through which they run many similar partnerships around the world, including a very similar one with Merchant Trade in Malaysia. And in terms of distribution partners, we've worked with two of them. First with RISE. There is an inclusive fintech which operates a Facebook platform and a bank account for Filipino maids. And the second one is HelloPesa, which is a money transfer operator, which was relatively new to the UAE at that time. It's important for you to know that the remittance market in the UAE is a very offline market. So customers have to go to the branch of a physical remittance house to transfer money. And from there, they choose which MTO, which money transfer operator to transfer money with. In terms of insurance product, we have first launched an accident and disability insurance, which was given for free to the end customers, simply for being clients of Rise or for transferring money via HelloPesa. And then we have launched a paid version, which had an increased coverage. Now, we're working with an insurance company in the Philippines to offer insurance product to the families of the migrant workers. In terms of results, these products, they're still ongoing and they're growing every month. We have issued approximately 30,000 policies, covering more or less 15,000 lives. The impact of COVID has been interesting and quite different, actually, for HelloPesa and Rise. If we look at HelloPesa, when the UAE went into strict lockdown in March and April last year, visits to remittance houses, and therefore the free insurance policies attached, dropped by 85 to 90%. For Rise, on the other hand, we saw a big increase in interest and demand for insurance, even and especially for the paid version. So we have introduced a telemedicine bundle so that customers had access to a doctor on the phone at the time when they couldn't leave their house. The grant project is now over, and we're looking to scale up this project with new remittance partners in new remittance corridors. If we have any remittance players listening, an interest to get into this space, please feel free to contact me. And now I would like to show you a quick video that gives you a better overview of this project and its impact on the migrant workers in the UAE and their families back home.
Every year, over 200 million migrants around the world send in excess of $500 billion to their families back home in developing countries. These funds guarantee access to basic daily needs such as health services and education, and the hope of a better future for their children. The current health crisis and its impact on employment and reduction in remittances has not only confirmed the crucial importance of these flows, but also highlighted their vulnerability. But the realities of these migrant workers are not measured in the millions being sent around the world, but on the $300 being sent home on a regular basis.
I'm Marvin Lutaya. I'm from Uganda. The funds that I send back home, I used to pay for my sister's education. They're all under me, so I have to fund their education as well. I have a sick mom, and my dad is getting old, so that's a lot of responsibility to me as well. Due to this pandemic, no one knows what will happen. But the fact that I've got insurance with me, I'm at ease. I'm at peace. Life moves on smoothly. I will definitely come back to use HelloPesa to send money back home, because definitely in 15 minutes they have the money. By the click of the hand, they have the money on their mobile phone. So it's easy for me and I love their services. I want my family to stay strong. Due to this pandemic we're in, I'll do everything I can in my possible ways to send them back money, to keep them funded, to keep them going on. They'll be having a better life, they'll be happy, and I'll also be happy when they're happy, and I'm fine. I want them to be fine.
Marvin is not alone in his worry. According to a study in 2018 made in the UAE, not being able to send money back home was the most cited concern among the participants. Simple insurance products such as personal accident, life, healthcare can alleviate easily this concern. However, the problem is not the insurance product, but the ability to educate and engage with the clients during the distribution of them. Today, our partners, RISE and Hello Paisa, are playing a very important role on this. Educating the clients on the benefits of having this type of insurance is key. During these difficult times, we have also added the teleconsultation as a benefit, so that our insurers can receive a medical consultation from their homes by just using their mobile phones.
My name is Laarni. I'm very happy that I'm covered by this insurance, especially this is happening right now, like we have the coronavirus, these uncertain times. We don't know what's going to happen to us. So it's very important we're sending regularly money to the Philippines to our loved ones. I would like to tell for my two boys that they don't have to worry about me here. I'm safe, I'm protected with the insurance. So I'll be sending regularly money to them. Subscribing is so easy. It's just in the mobile application, and I'll definitely gonna buy this one for my family back home.
Looking at ways to overcome these barriers, IFAD extended a grant to ADA, an inclusive finance NGO that partnered with Demogrants to provide insurance to migrants in the Gulf and their families back home via remittance channels. In the UAE, we have worked with money transfer operator Hello Paisa, inclusive fintech RISE, and insurance powerhouse AXA to create simple and cost-effective ways to allow migrant workers to access insurance and redeem claims simply using their mobile phones. Thanks to the power of technology, we have been able to provide affordable and accessible insurance to migrant workers in the UAE and their families back home.
The stories we've just heard are only a few among the millions of migrants around the world, supporting families and entire economies back in their home countries. The UAE is one of the largest remittance sending countries in the world. Through meaningful partnerships such as these, we can work towards closing the protection gap and create accessible financial products to form an ecosystem that supports financial inclusion.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, Michaeli, for that. Both the overview of what you did, that was really clear, and love seeing you on the video as well. I think it really brings the whole thing to life. So fantastic. And you've also helped with our process here, because we've segued from question 1 to question 2, or the area 2, which was looking for concrete examples. And that's a pretty clear concrete example. So thanks very much. So Veronica, seems like a while ago since we spoke, but it was probably only half an hour. So welcome back. I think you've obviously seen a lot of things and heard a lot of things. You've talked to a lot of people about practical things that companies have had to do, whether it's for just to stay in business, whether it's to carry on serving customers, or whether it's to meet regulatory hurdles or whatever. So maybe you could just give us a flavor of some of maybe the best things or the most interesting things you saw happen over the last few years. There's real sort of tangible things that perhaps others can learn from.
Yes, from the survey we identified, as I previously mentioned, some remittance service providers said that if the situation continued for long, they found it difficult to to survive. So yes, many changes and initiatives came. So I will mention a few from the private sector, which are the ones that we collected through the survey and then through the one-to-one meeting, as I mentioned before. So obviously priority was scaling to digital and mobile channels. That was number one. But then the remittance service providers also, they started implementing others like reduction or removing transaction cost wherever it was possible and for the period that it was possible, marketing awareness campaigns, incentive for customers. They started working in improving the network. Some of the members also implemented products and services that could cater to the immediate migrants' need. For example, remittance and financial services, access to health, to telehealth services and pharmacy, like we saw that Michaeli mentioned. Other members were moving or expanding to also lending, insurance, payment services. So some of them were already serving these products, but they decided to expand to other areas. Then we have others that invested in financial education, digital literacy campaigns to bring as many migrants on board to the digital channels, but at the same time, they invested in educating the employers. So employers on board to credit the migrants' wages into the digital platform directly. We saw an enormous amount of partnerships between the members and within the industry. I mean, I'm sure you saw how many were there. One of the things we noticed was that many of our members also took responsibility, the social responsibility of serving remittances. So we have members that, especially in Africa, that extended the service to groceries. And then we have members that were doing different things, you know, during the tough periods, like, for example, even measuring the temperature to the customers when they were coming into the branches, wherever they could have it open, then they were doing. So it was not just about, you know, surviving with the business. Yes, they were doing that, but at the same time, the social responsibility is something that we saw that came out very strongly. So from IMTN perspective, yes, we did join forces with UNCDF to do this report. The report was something that we shared afterwards with different regulators and policymakers. We were very glad to see that actually, you know, it was useful, the report, because we could see that some of the reaction from the regulators or policymakers were actually coming out or with some of the things that we mentioned in the report. So we were very glad to see when FATF, for example, came with the guidance on digital, on eKYC. But a lot more need to be done, but it was a beginning. We also joined forces with the Swiss government and the UK government in the call to action, remittance in crisis, how to keep them flowing, which is also supported by NOMA, the World Bank, UNCDF, IOM, UNDP, and the International Chambers of Commerce, and many other governments, like, to mention a few, Pakistan, Mexico, El Salvador, Nigeria, Jamaica, many more. There is a list that you can see on the website. We also joined force with the Remittance Community Task Force, chaired by IFAD, where we found it very useful because we thought it was a way to raise awareness of the situations and to reach even more and to work with other partners, others. I mean, we've been working already with GSMA, with NICA, we know each other very well, but we needed to extend it and to put the action together. I mean, together we could do more. So that was the idea. And we found it very, very productive that. So yes, digital was the main initiative, but we have to think that digital is not just a quick solution. It's not just scaling, building an app and expecting everyone to be onboarded or to have penetration. Like Nika also mentioned before, there are many challenges on this, and we all need to work together on this. So the initiatives were very good. Regarding, for example, the eKYC, that was another good initiative, but we would have liked to see more countries implementing that, or in some cases, we would have liked to see more stakeholders reading that guidance. So we are still missing that part. You know, there's a lack of development in some digital channels, especially on the receiving sides in some cases. And we have to consider that large percentage of migrants are unbanked or underbanked. And another important thing is that we need to consider that some of the migrant workers are not appropriately documented, and that is an issue and something that we have to work on, because if they are not documented, it's impossible to onboard them with our eKYC, and like that we will never onboard them into digital channel. I was previously mentioning that through these one-to-one meetings that we had with the CEOs of the remittance service providers, we managed to identify that we had, because of the lockdown, we had this shift from informal channel to formal. So that is something that it's important, but we need to have, you know, all the steps so that everything has to be connected in the whole ecosystem in order to onboard these to the digital channel. So, and we have to think also, like Leon was saying at the beginning, cash is still there, and migrants will use cash or digital. So we have to work everything together to make it beneficial for the migrants. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Veronica. You really covered a tremendous amount in a very short period of time. And I think you've also identified some of the areas that are going to need a lot more work. I take one of the big moves forward in the last year has actually been just the degree of dialogue and conversation and partnerships that have been built, whether at a commercial level or at a cross-country level, at a policy level between the private sector and the public sector and so on. So that's all been really good. And I guess the way forward is how do we build on that? Well, let's move on now to you, Nika. I think Veronica finished off towards the end there with saying building digital solutions, whilst everybody understands them, is not that quick and has challenges. Have you got some good examples either of new solutions or to address, say, the eKYC or the regulatory burdens that have particularly affected mobile money and digital operators? Looking for some good examples here. Just before you answer though, to give you a chance to think, just say anybody who's looking, please send any questions or comments in. We've already got a number. I don't promise we'll get through them now, but I do promise we'll get you an answer afterwards if we don't do that now. So Nika, over to you.
Perfect, thank you so much. So just echoing what Veronica mentioned, that obviously digitization doesn't happen overnight, and we need the infrastructure to be in place for that. And that is something that goes beyond the service provider's responsibility at the country level. You need to have the pillars or enablers in place. So if you want, if you have an eKYC system, if you have a system in place, it's obviously easier to KYC the customers remotely. And for instance, again, like stealing some of the examples from Persona, what we saw, for instance, in that value case study was that they came up with this kind of smart solution of digital onboarding, where you were onboarded by value staff, but digitally. But again, I think if you want to remove cash, move towards all digital, you need to be able to do things remotely and KYC the customers remotely as well. And the measures that I mentioned in the beginning that were in basically a collaboration with governments and regulators. One of them was KYC and onboarding requirements. And what we saw, for instance, was that in Senegal, when they implemented that, that meant that that bottom of pyramid and that many users who didn't have basically the required KYC documents, they could have access to mobile money services for the first time in a tiered way, obviously. But that meant, and for the first time, Orange, for instance, in Senegal, saw more parity between, gender parity between new customers compared to before. That really shows that these KYC requirements are a big hurdle. The other thing is that we all talked about digital and digitization, and we want to focus about moving away from cash, but the reality is that we're reliant on agents, whether they're MTO agents or mobile money agents. And particularly in this time, the health of the agents is another factor to consider. Obviously, their economic viability is one thing to look at, but the other one is that how do you protect your agents? And one good example that we saw was Vodacom in Mozambique. They basically set up 30,000 hand washing stations for the at M-Pesa agents across the country. And we saw a lot of other operators providing PPE to their agents and protecting the agents. So that is key to highlight as well. And other examples, obviously, we see and we hear a lot of hype on, okay, look at the fact that transaction costs were, or the fees were waived. That's why we see adoption amongst basically customers. That is, in most cases, for mobile money providers, is not a valuable business model, because their business model is different from banks. So those need to be taken into consideration, and the data needs to be interpreted better, because what we saw, for instance, in Kenya was that there were a lot of like transactions that were divided into different transactions so that people won't pay that fee. So at the end, the value of transactions didn't increase, but the volume increased, obviously. So I'm going to stop there. Obviously, I covered a few examples before in terms of like broad increase in transaction limits and balance limits, but these few examples come to mind. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nika. We're already building up a really big picture of things. The good news for everyone is that this is just the first of a number of meetings. I think we'll be holding them monthly, where we'll go into more detail on a lot of these topics. So don't worry if you feel like we're rushing along in too much detail. We'll make sure everybody comes along with us at the same speed. Prasanna, I sort of feel like maybe we made a mistake in putting you after Nika, because she seems to always have some value mention in there, probably stealing your thunder, but that's fine. So when we last left you, you told us all the challenges and you have us on the edge of our seats as to what happened. So over to you.
I mean, as I said, the digital Tech-celeration, we spoke about it. The entire remittance industry was very clear that this is the way to move forward. But digital adoption on its own, has been often challenged. I always say that it's both offline challenges and online challenges. To kind of list, not in the series of the same priorities, but I think smartphone availability, that itself is a challenge with workers, is because that's prone to damage, fall down. So they do not want to invest on a smartphone, which is expensive. Second is the internet bandwidth. Do they have a sufficient internet bandwidth to actually digitally send the money and digital experience of remittances? Then comes the most important is the literacy levels. They wouldn't have been here in this country working if they were literate. And second is the digital literacy. How do you actually, address this? Then in terms of so many years of experiencing touch and feel of cash, the trust levels with the mobile or digital remittance, it's still not there. That's yet to build in them. And then awareness and education about the whole digital and the mobile remittance. And to kind of overcome this, the biggest incentive that we actually thought about is convenience, safety, reliability. This is the shout that we wanted to take, and then this is how we actually come up with a very, very intuitive app. And in fact, value always came in, as Nika mentioned earlier initially, that we wanted to disrupt the informal market. We always believed that cash is our competition, informal is our competition. The traditional market along with us had to grow, so we wanted to kind of drive the growth for Malaysian remittance market by growing converting that informal market into the formal. So that was always our objective, to drive value wallet. With this, we came up with a very intuitive product, which is very easy. The challenge to the technology team was that within 3 press of buttons, the money should be at the receiving side instantly to be picked up either from the cash counter or into the bank account. So that was the objective that we were actually driving. And that's when the customers will adopt much faster than what you expect. API connections with multiple banks and wallet to wallet. That means that you are eliminating another cash pickup at the receiving location. It could be a consumption product for them. They go and make payments, they buy things, they do the top up, they make the utility bill payments using. So this is where value has actually been championing this entire digital remittance part, in the sense that how do we actually build wallet to wallet? How do we actually make sure that the customer on his own experiences it once, and then no matter what, he doesn't go anywhere, and he kind of empowers himself to kind of disrupt the informal. So that was always been our idea. And then this kind of situation that we were in, we took it as a launching platform to kind of really take it to the next level by aggressively promoting this into the social media. And always there were live sessions, 100 people coming in at a time, and then they move out, another 100 people coming in various different languages, so that very native language, so that the workers download the app right from beginning, downloading the app into the cashing in into the wallet, converting the digital cash into the the physical cash into digital cash. All these trainings, we've gone through the entire journey, and then we've seen a lot of success. It's worth mentioning here that eFAD has we worked a grant with the eFAD, and then we worked together to run a project, especially sending wallet to wallet transactions from Malaysia to Pakistan and Malaysia to Bangladesh. We've seen a huge success in terms of this whole project picking up, and then now it is left to the operator to scale it up to the different level. The results were pretty encouraging. The whole products were accepted very well. The whole concept was picked up very, very well by the migrant workers. So overall, I would say that it's a journey. It's a journey worth taking it. I mean, because it's 4 times more effort required than over-the-counter transaction to get a customer. But I think it takes 1/3 the effort to actually retain him, is because the customer retains himself, is because the experience that he experiences with the kind of product that you have is not going to go away anywhere from you.
Great, thank you very much, Prasanna. I know you've really condensed your answer, and I'm sure you've got a lot more you can tell us. So again, we've got the document that's just been published for people to refer to in more detail. So now I'm going to come to the last area. I'm quite conscious of the time as well, and I would like to get through some questions. So what I'm probably going to do is just, as if there are questions I think are relevant for somebody specific, I'll ask you to cover that in your answers as well. But in this section, we really want to, I think we've got a good feel for some of the things that have happened, and there's been a lot and some good examples. But I think, Veronica, you've been very good at emphasizing we're not there yet and there's a lot more work needed. So I think for each of you, I'd like you sort of to talk maybe up to 3 different areas that you think we should be focusing on in the future. I'll leave you to define how far into the future that we really need to solve to make the progress that we want to do. And then Veronica, there's also a question here which is more detailed just on the costs. You mentioned that some of the providers have offered reduced transaction costs. I think the questioner is looking for some any tangible examples you might have, and I think there's 1 or 2 in the blueprint anyway. But also, more importantly, I guess, do you think those are going to continue going forward, and will costs come down? So there's quite a lot to cover, but I'll give you the challenge.
Thank you. Yes, some of the members started when we were especially in lockdown. They started reducing. We noticed that we're reducing the fees. We have to consider also that to scale up, they need financial support, so it costs money to scale up to digital channels. So far they did not transfer these costs to the final pricing, so they've been absorbing that cost. But even though whenever they could, they did some promotions for a period of time. In some cases there were free transactions to specific corridors, mostly digital. And in some cases it was they partnered between others remittance service providers, and they offered reduced cost. There was an example that I think is in the blueprint report. Leon, you can correct me if not, from 2 of our members that did that, and the example you can read it there is between Mukuru and WorldRemit in order to reduce the final cost of the remittances. So it's there. If you want more, you can always contact me, it's not a problem. Regarding then what's next, how do we continue? I always used to go to Leon when he was presenting reports and saying to Leon, yes, it's a nice report, but what's next? And now the question comes to me, what's next? After all these reports and all these roundtables or webinars, webinar, I would say, that we've been having, or Zoom conversations that we've been having, I think when the blueprint report detailed some specific point to actions to go through, some in the short term, some in the long term. But I think there are 2 things that I would like to highlight that we need to keep in mind. And one is financial inclusion. Whatever action we take, we need to think about financial inclusion should be a priority. Whether it happens digital or physical, it has to be a priority. Migrants will use both. They will use what they have available, but it needs to be definitely a priority. And the other one, which is, as usual, the elephant in the room, is bank de-risking. Bank de-risking so far represents a market failure where all the stakeholders, banks, regulators, policymakers, remittance service providers, all the stakeholders appear to be acting rationally, but in their own best interest. So we have not achieved anything. And it's been many, many years of talking about this, trying to find a solution, but never actually progressing on this. And I believe the ambiguity of regulatory framework is what allowed the stakeholders to pass the responsibility from one to each other and never actually working together. And that's one of the things that I think we need to change. I mean, the present COVID-19 pandemic, has definitely showed that the consequences of the bank de-risk are mostly felt by the migrants. And that's something that we need to change. I'm still optimistic that we can do something, but we do need to work together. We need to find a way where we can sit together at the round table, all of us with the same agenda. And I leave it for the rest. Thank you, Leon.
Great, thanks very much, Veronica. I think we did quite well to get most of the way through the discussion without mentioning de-risking. So actually that's quite good. There is a question about what issue Veronica was talking about. So hopefully that's been answered now. De-risking, the inability of money transfer operators and others to be able to keep or gain bank accounts that they need to run their businesses. I'm sure that will be a discussion in one of the future months coming up, and hopefully with some tangible answers. So now, Nika, let's come to you in terms of how you see the future moving. What are the key things that you think need to be done in the relatively short term to bring some of these solutions and make them more scalable? And I think there might have been a question for you. There's one we'll probably have to answer offline here, sorry. It was something about giving more color to, do you have any figures at all on mobile money corridor volumes in Africa? So it's probably in one of your many reports, but that's a specific question you might be able to answer quickly before you tell us what needs to happen going forward.
I think, Leon, off the top of my head, I don't remember the stats. Maybe I need to answer this offline and look at some of the reports and stats. But looking at the issues, I think I don't want to repeat everything that Veronica mentioned, so I'm going to only talk about maybe 3 points, which are all the regulatory challenges. First and foremost, I think we need to establish an open and level playing field to encourage competition. And that means that giving kind of regulators willingness to facilitate market entry for non-traditional players, including mobile money providers and fintech players. So that's key. And we know that in a lot of markets, even across Africa, where mobile money is the lead solution for financial services, the regulatory bodies who are looking after the international remittances, they're a bit skeptical. There are uncertainties around the requirements or time frame to respond from the regulator, well, the licensing requirements, etc. So that needs to be approved when there is willingness as well. I think the other thing that I want to mention, and it kind of ties together with what Veronica was saying around financial inclusion. Again, we see the success that the mobile money has achieved in driving financial inclusion is mainly because of the principle of proportional regulation, i.e. lower requirements for lower balances and transfer amounts in the domestic kind of context. Basically knowing that a lot of these, for instance, intra-African remittances are sub $100, and in some cases, most of them are sub $50. We need a similar kind of principle when it comes to cross-border remittances as well. And the third one, which I think is very important, is that I don't have the numbers right now ready, but I know, Leon, you've done a recent study on like mapping all of the mobile money enabled corridors, and I knew that majority, around 2/3, and I think it still is valid, of these countries where mobile money can be used for international remittances are all on the received side rather than sending side. So getting a license for sending remittances has been more difficult for providers across Africa, for instance. And similarly, we've seen, for instance, where the process of securing approval for a new corridor via an already vetted and approved payment hub, such as MFS Africa, was very long. And every time, for instance, you wanted to open a new corridor, you had to go through lengthy processes. So we need to make sure that more corridors can be basically opened when you're going through, let's say, any payments hub, including MFS Africa, where it has already been vetted and approved by the regulator. So I'm going to stop there.
Great, thank you very much. So a lot on regulation there. So I think, and that's obviously come out with a lot of Veronica's as well. So it's quite interesting. Clearly, the industry has done a lot, but it feels like it needs help from other partners that it can't address or solve or rewrite regulations, just communicate. Prasanna, why don't we come to you now for your thoughts on the way forward? What do we need to do going forward?
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, Leon, that the digital and the mobile remittance is just the beginning in many of the geographies here. I mean, there are so many offline challenges, there are so many online challenges. I mean, the biggest challenge that I see in terms of speeding up the whole thing and scaling up the entire migrant base around, they like this services is onboarding. That's, I think, is the biggest challenge that we are seeing. So how do we actually break those barriers for onboarding and accessing the mobile money services? Level playing, I mean, in terms of how do we, kind of make it easy for them to kind of onboard. That's the most important thing. We have ecosystems where one of the couple of the government departments, if they probably can, connectivity among the government departments to ease onboarding process of foreign workers, using technology where systems are able to check and access information for verification purposes, can significantly actually take up the mobile money registrations. So that's, I think, the biggest challenge. If the government departments can start looking, I mean, there should be a willingness to do that. And then there are certain challenges as well. I mean, if that could be done, definitely this can go to the next level, because that's the starting point. And if that is not actually addressed, I believe that that we will further add more challenges than actually solving the problem. So that's definitely the one thing that comes into it. And then from the operators, the the money transfer operators, there's always an inertia, as I mentioned earlier. Yes, it's tough to do that, but then that is always light at the end of the tunnel, is because ever escalating costs in terms of operations in brick and mortar model, but digital as well as the mobile remittance is a one-time expense, but then it actually pays off much faster. In terms of what the operators can do, I can say that reduce the remittance transaction costs. Definitely, there is less cost that is incurred in terms of building the physical infrastructure. If it could be passed on to the customer, it will act definitely as a retention thing. And then free cash pickup and deliveries, this could be an additional thing. And then we've seen the example Michaeli has actually shared that, yes, value-added services, bundling up with the insurance, these are the products that they want. They need this product. And we spoke a lot in detail about financial education and awareness. Invest in that as an operator. Indulge in remittance channels, and create agent locations for them as a part of the ecosystem to convert the physical cash into the digital cash. I think these are the things, which is a journey. I mean, very, very easily said than done, but then we can keep working along these lines.
Great. Okay, that's a pretty impressive shopping list as well, which is great. But I think the key thing that is coming out is that if we can get people into the system, that's an absolutely massive thing. Once they're there, we can work with them, help them to make the right decisions for them. And I think the other thing is we have to give them the tools, not just the physical tools, but actually the educational tools, so they actually build up the trust and know what they can do with things. Michaeli, I know it was a while since we saw you and your video as well. I think you gave us a great picture, but I'm also quite encouraged by the fact that all the other contributors today have mentioned, seen the value in what you're trying to do. So I'm really keen to understand, I guess, what needs to happen in this world that we can overcome some of the barriers to being able to leverage the remittances or harmonize the transfer of money, the remitters, with access to broader financial services like insurance.
Yeah. No, look, I think, yeah, so it's inevitable that it's very interesting, you know, I mean, people are very interested in this, you know, in this bundling of different, of different financial services, and most importantly, it is proven that they actually provide value to the end consumers. Now, it is difficult, yes. Let's not, you know, let's not forget it. And I think that some of the point that the other panelists have mentioned, they summarize it all. I mean, first of all, regulation. I mean, if we look at our project, so we had to consider insurance and remittances in the UAE. They're regulated by two different authorities. So remittances is regulated by the central bank. Insurance is regulated by the insurance authority. If you take into account then a cross-border insurance program, where you also look at the families back home, then you add the two more regulators. You need to consider there are four of them. So yes, regulation is probably very hard nut to crack. The second one, you know, we've been talking a lot about digital and seamless customer journey. I would say don't even start without a seamless customer journey that has to be digital first. However, if a customer is used to go to the branch to send money, then you need to adapt the insurance journey to that. You cannot force him to go digital. And last but not least, to summarize it all, it has been for us vital, the public-private partnership. I think not only Democrats, but also AXA, Hello Paysa, and WISE, they wouldn't have embarked in this 3 years journey if we didn't have the support from IFAD. So that's my summary. Regardless, this is super exciting, super interesting. And so, I mean, I really hope that more partnerships like this, they're going to arise in the next years.
Perfect. Thank you, Michaeli. That's great. So we're coming towards the end. So we'll make sure that we finish on time. I think just say there are 1 or 2 questions that we probably haven't answered fully. So we will answer those outside of this session. Some really good ideas, questions and comments coming in. Thank you very much for that. I think we've had a really fruitful, quite fast-paced and quite wide-ranging discussion. We've really heard a lot about what happened last year. There was a tremendous amount, and I think it's really good that people have a pretty good handle on what happened, why it happened, some of the solutions that were tried. And I think more importantly, or as importantly, so what do we do from now? So I think for me, some of the key things that came out, there's a lot around the whole regulatory piece and dialogue between regulators and the industry. There are clearly some things that the industry themselves can do to maybe move more quickly to digital, to be involved in some of these education areas. But I think this whole piece about education and trust is really important. And I think the other parts are how we combine or leverage remittances, not just to be about transferring the money, but actually how people use the money that they're getting, how we can link remittance payments to help people live more fulfilled financial lives. So as I said, this is the first of a number, so I'll be handing back to Pedro shortly. But I think the other point is we've talked and focused quite rightly here on the private sector. The private sector is one of three strands in this eGFRID series, along with the families and the individuals who send and receive money and the public sector. So we should never think of each one as separate, but all integrated. All we've done today is help understand and discuss a bit more about the private sector needs. But to make this happen, we have to all work together with some speed, I think, to move things forward. So I would finally like to thank all of the four speakers, so Veronica, Nika, Prasanna and Michaeli. Thanks so much, first of all, for sharing with us. Prasanna, I know it's probably about midnight or afterwards where you are, so we particularly appreciate that. I know it's later in the day for you, Michaeli, as well. But for all of you for really taking the time, whetting our appetites for what's to come. So thank you very much. Pedro, I'll hand back to you to tell everyone about Thursday's meetings and going forward.
Thank you, Leon, for a fantastic job. Really, very, very appreciated. Fascinating discussion. And as you say very well, I mean, you said most of what I wanted to say. This is the first of several. We do encourage the follow-up questions on this. If you had not the opportunity to ask them today, please do send them, because we will consolidate this and be part of the agendas of the upcoming events. There will be linkages, of course, across sectors. So as Leon said, the session ones on each of the tracks address the families, the private sector, and the enabling environment. But as we go on, we're going to be seeking again on how to implement these measures. As Veronica said very well, it's very nice to have the dialogues to get a cohesive approach to what are the issues, but it's a crime to stay at that level and not go forward. How do we implement this? And to implement, we need examples. So as a result of this event, for instance, and the numerous examples that have been introduced, we're going to be putting also this in the website. The idea at the end of the day is, can we create a conglomerate of good practices? And more importantly, the challenges. What is the tricky part when we try to implement this? We heard about some of these today. We're going to expand on that so we can inspire others. Certain governments can see what to do. Other practitioners can get inspired in replicating. Why not scale up? And I think if we all do that, we address the working all together aspect. And most importantly, also address some of the hot potatoes. I coined you, Veronica, with that. The de-risking is a hot potato. There's going to be a session on that, but we would like to bring it in a constructive manner. We know where there's some barriers, where some regulators are stuck. Can we bring, maybe in a small ecosystem, some solutions to that? So overall, I think there's a dramatic change, and your interventions today has really clearly show that. I think there's a number of two. There's this tech-celeration beyond our wide expectations that has happened over this pandemic. I remember GSMA releasing the report prior to pandemic and projections, and then everything was blown because it just went up the roof. So this tech-celeration is a fantastic opportunity, really, to have this mindset, particularly among customers, I say, and that has proven to be right. The second one, not on customers, but among all of us, is that paradigm shift from cost prioritization to really more of a global consensus now that we need to make remittances count more, to leverage these, particularly with financial inclusion. And at the forefront is the private sector bringing these new models of linkages. So I think these two elements are fantastic. And as we can develop this more over the coming months, I think we all together will be able to provide some sort of clear guidelines on how to effectively implement many of the measures that we all identified during this past tense. So without further ado, again, thank you so much for all your presence today, particularly for those far away where it's very late. Want to thank you again, Leon. Thank you so much for this. This event has been recorded, so you will be able to see it again, and we will send next week a summary of all the sessions, of all the tracks compiled before we engage into the agenda building for the subsequent sessions. So thank you so much for your interventions, and we wish you a good continuation of the day or the evening or the morning for some. Thank you so much. Thanks, Leon, again.
Thanks.